Good morning. I'm Dusky Terry, President of ITC Midwest. For the third straight year, we are pleased to be the presenting sponsor for the Iowa Ideas Conference and extraordinarily proud of our partnership with the Gazette. As an electric transmission company serving 2/3 of the state, ITC Midwest is invested in and has a very real stake in the future of Iowa. We've supported this conference since its inception because we embrace its mission of gathering hundreds of Iowans together to explore the key questions and the big ideas that will shape the future of our state. ITC Midwest was formed in 2007 to improve electric transmission reliability and increase transmission system capacity in Iowa. And we followed through on that commitment with more than $4.1 billion in capital investments to date. Our investments in the system not only serve the changing needs of customers, they also provide additional capacities to support economic growth and development of low-cost renewable energy resources. Our investments have resulted in a 62% drop in transmission-related outages since ITC acquired the system and began operating it. From extreme weather events such as last year's derecho to the unprecedented transition to renewable energy, from the rapid adoption of electric vehicles to the increasing focus on energy system resilience, the electric utility industry is suddenly in the national spotlight. All of these forces reinforce the critical role of the transmission grid to support the changing landscape and ensure consumers have access to low-cost, clean, and reliable electricity. You know, we often talk about here at ITC about the power of connection, meaning connections are needed to deliver power to communities. There's also tremendous power when people connect to solve problems. Over the next couple of days, I hope you will engage in the breakout sessions, speak up during discussions, and share your ideas to create a brighter future. Open your mind to different points of view as we all work together to come up with the best solutions for making Iowa an even better place now and in the future. I want to thank you for your participation to help shape the future and wish you a great conference.
Good afternoon. I am Michael Chevy Castronova. I am the Iowa Ideas Magazine editor. I'm also business editor here at the Gazette. Welcome to another session in the Gazette's 5th annual Iowa Ideas Conference. This afternoon, we're going to talk about something seems like we've been talking about for a number of years. We need to figure out ways to build a more robust workforce pool in this state. Or to put that another way, maybe we don't have enough people. And maybe I'm oversimplifying this. I don't know, but that's what we're going to talk. That's what we have a panel here today to talk about. So we're going to start. I'm going to ask each of our panel members to introduce themselves by name, where you work, and a little bit about what you do there. I'm going to go in the order in which you appear on my screen. Liesl, would you go first? Who are you and where do you work and what do you do there?
My name is Liesl Kremer. I'm the director for Buchanan County Economic Development. So I work in, just to locate Buchanan County in the state, we are right on Highway 20 as Independence and by Waterloo. A lot of people know where Waterloo, Cedar Falls is. So we're in that section of the state.
Liesl, what do you do?
Hi, good afternoon. I am Liesl Seabert with the Center for Rural Revitalization within Iowa Economic Development Authority. And in that role, I manage the Governor's Empower Rural Iowa initiative, which includes 3 task forces: Grow, Connect, and Invest. And we look at issues ranging from broadband to housing, to leadership development, to recruitment and retention of Iowans and everything in between in our rural communities, and have a few grant programs that have come out of those task forces. So a little bit of everything, and workforce is a big piece of it.
Megan?
Yes, I'm Megan Schulte. I work for Froniter Co-op. So we're located in Norway, Iowa, just outside of Cedar Rapids. I'm the VP of HR here, so oversee recruiting, benefits, safety, training, development, and anything in between there.
Michael.
Excellent. My name is Michael Wagler. I'm the state coordinator for the Main Street Iowa program at the Iowa Economic Development Authority. And in that role, I manage the implementation of the state's downtown revitalization efforts with the Iowa Economic Development Authority team and the Iowa Downtown Resource Center.
Okay, very good. For those of you watching, I want to remind you, you can take part in this by writing your questions in the chat box that's down there at the bottom of your Zoom screen or Whova screen. write in your questions, your comments. Those will go to our room host, who will then forward them to me. Please do not wait until the last 10 minutes, which is what I know happens. We might not get to them. So please, as we're going along. Also, I'm going to invite our panelists to comment on each other's comments, anything to say. You know, we want to have a good conversation here, and we're going to talk about workforce. So let's get started, shall we? This first question is for all our panelists. Last month, I interviewed Catherine Ann Edwards. She's an economist with the Rand Corporation. She was part of the Gazette Annual Business Awards. And we talked about how Iowa doesn't really have a lot of people. We have just 3 million, a little more than 3 million. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, for the entire state. And we've been talking about workforce shortages across the board. It seems like forever. Dr. Edwards noticed, and she noted, and she admitted at the time, this is an oversimplification, that the solutions are one of two. We either import more people to Iowa, or what we need to do is the people who are already here, we need to get them working. I know each one of you thinks about this probably a lot. And what I'm asking you now, what is one thing that could be done, or at least we should think more about? What's one thing we could do to improve workforce opportunities in Iowa's rural communities? And that is our focus today. So Lisa in Buchanan County, rural community, kind of, sort of?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's
Definitely.
the one, what's one thing? One thing, you get to pick one.
One thing. It's one thing that we're doing. I think we need to really double down on our future ready Iowa, keeping our kids, making that pipeline from our schools into our businesses and industries. And rather than having them go college and leave, have them have that connection to their community and their community businesses, and keeping them within the state and hopefully within their community. Those are my thoughts on that.
And you're alluding to the fact that we have lots of folks who graduate from high school, maybe even from college here, but then they go elsewhere.
Exactly.
Lisa, what do you see?
Well, I would say to not discount the significance of the quality of life aspects in our communities. The jobs are there. It's about attracting people to the jobs, and people now have options. So they are essentially moving to where they want to live, and then kind of choosing a job from there. So making sure that our communities and our regions are really focusing on those quality of life pieces, I think, is a really, really big part of the workforce attraction piece.
Okay, Michael, from your perspective, also in Des Moines, what do you think?
Absolutely. And knowing that that Liesl and I agree on a lot of things, I will actually piggyback on what Liesl said. And it's not just that, it's not just about the quality of life. And it's one of those buzzwords that we're hearing right now, but it's the idea of placemaking. And the crux of what placemaking is creating a place where people want to live, want to invest, want to love. And I think if we, if we could really look at how our communities could start to focus a little bit more on that idea of community economic development, to me, that becomes one of the foundations to help support workforce development across the state.
Megan, you're at a company. What do you see? What's Frontier think about this? What do you think about this?
So when you say that question, you're talking about bringing people into the state, which I think is a wonderful thing, or how can we get more people here working? And from my perspective, we're primarily manufacturing environment. So a lot of times when you're bringing new people into the state, they're in the professional side of the world. So they're looking for office jobs in marketing, finance, engineering types of positions. And where we're really lacking is manufacturing roles. So operators, production workers, those types of roles. So really the only option that we really have is get more people employed for it. And there's a few different options going about that and kind of tapping into different areas or people that are maybe unemployed or underemployed on that aspect for it, but also as both Leslie and Michael had spoken to, people are going to live where they want to live. So figuring out how we get to those people to the right areas where we need kind of more people to fill some jobs.
So you're talking about training for some of these folks, yes?
A little bit. a little bit in all of that.
Why don't you expand in that then? Why?
Yeah, so training is definitely a component in the piece of everything. So being on the manufacturing side of things, we're located here in Norway, Iowa. We have a location in Urbana, Iowa. We have one in Plaine, Iowa, all very small town environments for it. And if we're just going to recruit out of that small community, we're never going to hit what we need from a labor projection standpoint. And so we have to pull from other areas. We have to be able to pull from the corridor area, from other small towns, or even from places like Cedar Rapids and some of those larger cities to come here. So even if people, it's more convenient for them, or there's more support for them to be in the Cedar Rapids area because they have more surrounding services for them, that's great, but we need to be able to bring them out to the Norway locations and our smaller town locations to be able to keep those businesses running.
I want to stay with you for a minute, Megan.
Yeah.
So Frontier Co-op, you mentioned you have facilities in Norway, Belle, Plaine, and you said Urbana, was that the third one?
Yep, Urbana, and then North Liberty. Yep.
North Liberty I knew about, yeah.
Yeah.
From where does Frontier draw its workers, and what are some of the programs you put in place there? And one of the things I'm thinking about, where I'm going to go with this, right, was the program you developed with Willis Stady.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Shuttling workers back and forth. So where are you getting your workers to work at Frontier? Why don't you tell us a little bit about what they're doing there?
Yeah, for sure. So Frontier Co-op, obviously I mentioned to you guys, as a manufacturing type of environment. So we're doing a lot of different herbs and spice blends, packaging line, distribution types of jobs, warehousing types of positions. And so we employ over 600 employees. So when you're adding headcount, we're adding, 50 at a time. And we used to be able to, when I first started at Frontier 10 years ago, we could pull from all the small towns and be able to keep up with kind of what our labor projections were needing us to. 5 years ago, not so much. We really started to have to compete with some of these larger organizations, like the Quaker Oats and ADMs and things like that in the Cedar Rapids area, to be able to pull people out of Cedar Rapids to get a good job here in Norway, Iowa. So we actually started an initiative a few years ago around breaking down barriers to employment. So there's a few different categories when we talk about that. The one that you had just mentioned, Michael, is one of them. So we've actually partnered with Willis Stady Homeless Shelter to provide a few different services for us. So one area is our second chance hiring practices that we have. So we have two different components of second chance hiring. So we do returning citizens, and then we also do people that are facing homelessness or have experienced homelessness. And we partner with Willis Stady. They vet all of our candidates, just like any contract employee or temporary employee staffing agency would do. And then we actually also provide transportation. So we partnered with them as well to provide a van that goes back and forth between the Cedar Rapids area to actually Norway location on all three of our shifts that we run. So we have a transportation piece to it. We also recognize that people deal with a lot of stuff outside of the workplace. And if they're not in a good place from a personal standpoint, then they're not going to be their best selves here professionally either. So we offer some on-site counseling and support services for our employees. And then lastly, we have an on-site child care available along with a child care reimbursement program. So that kind of all encompasses our Breaking Down Barriers initiative overall.
So this is for both Liesl and Lisa. Following up on that, what sorts of jobs, we're talking about, we have these jobs to fill. What kind of jobs are we talking about? Liesl, you want to go first, please?
I mean, honestly, I think we're seeing workforce needs in every sector. I feel like traveling the state, you hear from a lot of businesses that are ready to grow and just don't have the people able to do it. I mean, I'm talking everything from, ag to, your Main Street businesses that are doing well, and manufacturing and everything in between. So, and we're seeing needs at all levels as well. The people that are actually on the floor doing the manufacturing work to, the higher ups too. So I honestly see the need in rural communities kind of across the board. That's good news and bad news. Yeah.
Lisa, how's that impact look to you? How's that opportunity look to you in Buchanan County? What kind of jobs are we talking about there?
It's really the same thing here in Buchanan County. Definitely the industries are struggling to find who they need. but it's Main Street as well, our restaurants. That's obviously one that I know is hit throughout the state just because of the lack of workers. And it's hard for a restaurant to get a worker when they can go to the manufacturing company and get paid twice as much. And then it's hard for those manufacturers still to bring those workers in. I know in our area, a lot of our manufacturers, 30% are from our county or our communities.
30% of the employees.
30% of the
Okay.
employees from our area. So we're bringing in a lot of people, but we're also losing a lot of people going out to the larger communities as well. So, I mean, manufacturing is definitely one of our top ones in need of employment.
Michael, I see you nodding your head.
Well, yeah, I'm agreeing with everything. And Lisa mentioned one of the industries, especially in many downtowns and across the state and country, is the restaurant industries that are the destination businesses in many cases, in many rural communities. In many cases, there may only be one restaurant, and that one restaurant is struggling to maintain regular hours. But I think one of the observations that we've made and many others have made is over the last 18 months, there's been a lot of people that have reevaluated their professional and their career lives. And in some cases, that's been really great because statewide, we've seen an increase in small business. We've seen an increase in entrepreneurism, which has taken people away from other industries. So I guess in my perspective, it's, we're at an extreme transitioning point, and no one really knows where we're going to end when we get to the end of this transition point, when the dust begins to settle. But back to your question, Michael, I think that need for workforce is from big to small, and it's a unique time in our history that, like Liesl said, does create an opportunity in many cases in many rural communities to reevaluate who they are moving forward and really change the traditional stereotypical identity of what a rural community has to be.
And I'm glad you brought that up because we are talking about rural areas. So we're not talking about Cedar Rapids or Iowa City or Des Moines. We're talking about these other areas and where they don't have the ADMs and the Cargills and the Quaker Oats. And we're talking about restaurants and one answer always is, well, pay them more. Well, then the costs. I think the phrase is pressure points. How you afford that without pushing that to your customers. And so it's a challenge. So my question is, and maybe I want to start with you, Megan. I mean, how do businesses make those kind of investments? And how do you do that? We haven't even started to talk about daycare or transportation yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's definitely tough. Sometimes, no offense to everybody on the panel doing a ton of great work. Sometimes from an employer aspect of things, it's tough because it's almost like if you build it, they will come type of mentality. So please, employer, go build a huge warehouse in this small town and the people will follow. And that's not always true because they don't. You have to have some of these other services available to them. So really at Frontier Co-op, we've looked at how can we help ourselves in those situations and what solutions can we provide there or partner with other organizations to be able to provide. Obviously, I spoke to a lot on our breaking down barriers and us having childcare on site. And when you're talking about restaurants and stuff in Norway, Iowa, there's, a couple bars, but gas station, but that's about it that you're going to find around here. So we actually have an on-site organic cafeteria, which is really just encompassed in our overall benefits package overall. But I think from a training perspective and each of those pieces, they sound good in theory, but all of them cost money and all of them come out of the same bucket of money at the end of the year. So it's very hard for employers to decide where you're going to invest that extra dollar at the end of the year, mostly when we've had a struggle this past couple of years with COVID and all the impacts related to that. We've obviously benefited a lot from funding that we've gotten through various avenues. Through like Kirkwood, they have a 260E program, 260F program, and a WTED program. That we've utilized a lot, and that just helps.
Could you explain those a little bit? Those three programs you just mentioned, those are what?
Yeah, I can try. Hopefully there's no Kirkwood representative that's going to correct me on any of them. But 260E program is a new jobs program.
Okay.
So it's basically incentivizing you to create new jobs here in Iowa. And when you do, then you get basically a tax credit or tax diversion for that. And you can use that money for training dollars. So you can use it on your employees that you have to send them to various trainings and continue to upskill them across the board with it. Same with 260F, a little bit different where it's really looking at your current employees and reimburses you 50% for training dollars. And then WTED is same type of program, reimburses you 50% and it's done through the Kirkwood programming or organization and stuff through it. But all of those are ran through their programming. And so that's been able to help support us as we've had to make some of those decisions and where we want to invest our dollars. It's definitely supported us in our growth aspects of things and helping people continue to develop and continue to upskill.
Okay. You know, and we're talking about restaurants, and we at the Gazette did a story on restaurants here in Cedar Rapids and Iowa City, talking about how they couldn't find enough staff, and that was before the pandemic. So, you know, they offered more money, and it was still an issue because there weren't enough people willing to do that. So, Liesl, from your perspective, from your perch in Des Moines, what can businesses do about this? What do you see? And I realize that's a pretty open-ended question.
It is. I like open-ended. That's good. I think that, and it's not only businesses, but I think we need to not necessarily stay in our traditional lanes. So you kind of briefly mentioned the other pieces to this, the childcare, the housing. I think we're seeing the most successful areas and businesses are the ones that are maybe stepping outside their lane a little bit. I mean, Megan talked about how they have childcare on site, businesses that are able to do things like that. And if they aren't partnering with the city or the county to understand what the bigger needs are in their area and helping to be partners towards the solutions, not only staying within, you know, maybe what they think is supposed to be what they were doing in the past. So, and the same advice would be for cities that want to have more workforce in their areas. Cities need to be thinking outside of the box as well and stepping outside of their traditional lanes and helping with these other pieces of economic development like housing and childcare. So I think that's kind of the big piece that's going to be critical for success is when people just really start collaborating and breaking down, not to use an overused term, but breaking down those silos and working together to find solutions.
Let me ask you and Michael this, whichever one of you wants to touch this. We haven't talked about this, but we've gotten close. The notion of hiring people who were in prison. We talk a lot about that in cities. How much of that is that discussed? Is that considered by the businesses you talk to in the less urban area? Let's say that less urban areas. Do they talk about that? Is that a consideration?
Michael, do you want to go first or do you want me to go?
Why don't you go first? Because
Okay.
I don't know that I could even go second. It's not
Fair enough.
So Lisa, why don't you jump in this? How about that?
Well, I just have one example because I've now mentioned, and we've mentioned housing a couple of times. Homes for Iowa, if you're familiar with that program, it is out of the Newton Correctional Facility, and it is while you're in the correctional facility, teaching you training on how to build homes, and they're actually building homes that are then being shipped to rural communities for primarily infill housing, building affordable workforce homes, with the intent that once they have gone through this training for a certain amount of time, they have a kind of, I believe it's a certificate at the end of it or what have you, to have that trade to help them then find employment, because we all know that those are the exact trades, just one of the kinds of trades we are needing across the state in general, but definitely in rural areas. So that would be the one example I've seen where kind of the attempt to make sure that they have the skills to be able to find that employment once they are out of the system. And I know that there are other programs. That's just one that I've worked with closely because it's also addressing the housing challenge. So it's kind of a 2-for-1 goal there.
Sure. I want to remind people watching, please comments, questions in the chat box at the bottom. Let's go to Buchanan County, Lisa. So sure. I know you've got all kinds of programs going on up there, and we've had representatives from economic development in other panels throughout the year. Why don't you tell us about some of them, specifically as they go toward fulfilling workforce needs in your part of the world?
Yeah, we've been working on all avenues, and one of the big things that we have been working on housing, daycare, everything that's been mentioned here, the fact that you want to have a great place to bring people to want to come to your area. So tourism is one of the things that we've really worked on within our community, within our county, and it's really one way that we can set ourselves apart. We also work with Cedar Valley Regional Partnership, and that is a group of 6 counties, and we work together to try to enhance our area. We have Live the Valley as a way to enhance our area as well. That is our regional website to try to entice people to our area. For one thing that we did do, we applied for workforce housing. Unfortunately, the housing tax credit, we did not get that, but we continue to work on upper story housing for our downtowns. That's a new grant that's available. Housing, doing that, and also working on our downtowns. We just recently received a community development block grant for the downtown of Independence. We're working in childcare in 4 communities within our county. It all connects, and it's all vital for us to be able to market ourselves as a place for our industries, to bring workers. It's just something that those are some of the projects that we're working on. We're really excited about the ones that we've received, and we continue to work towards enhancing our daycare throughout our area, enhancing our housing throughout our area. We've built a number of different homes throughout the county, and it's just continues to be a process.
Well, let me ask you this. You mentioned childcare, daycare, and you mentioned you're working with 4 communities. Working with them, what does that look like? What actual kind of programs are we talking about?
Different communities look different. One community is working on creating a childcare as well as a community center. Another community, 2 other communities are looking at expanding their existing childcare. We're looking at industries creating their own childcare, their own on-site childcare, like Megan said they have with their co-op. And all the things that you guys have been discussing are things that we have talked about too. It's just the process of getting them everything going and encompassing all of it.
So, Michael, at Main Street, Iowa, how do you work with businesses? You talk to businesses, and what are you hearing, and what are they saying, and what do they need, and how do you convince them to stay and build and invest?
Well, you prefaced Liesl's question by saying that's an open-ended question. I think I even got a more open-ended question.
Yes.
I think the reality is it's all of the above, and I really appreciate what Lisa's talking about, the work in Buchanan County, because I think that's one of the things that we continue to see, and I mentioned it before, is that many businesses have really started to reevaluate their business model of how they're doing work, how they're operating each day, how their pro formas will look on a regular basis. But I think one of the more exciting pieces that I'm seeing is, and we're seeing at Main Street, Iowa, is how communities are doing that same thing. So I think the reality that daycare is an identified need connected to not only the quality of life, but the economic development realities in the state of Iowa. We administer, one of the grant programs we administer is the Main Street Iowa Challenge Grant. And we've been doing that since 2002. And in the last 3 or 4 rounds, we've seen a daycare facility that's located in the downtown to help support the downtown businesses as either a funded application or an applied project, which really starts to see the difference in what the use of downtown is. It's not the traditional retail use in many communities across the state of Iowa. So downtowns and communities are really rethinking how they're utilizing their existing infrastructure and their existing buildings. But I think the other side is is housing is that other key element that we've been talking about. And there again, Lisa mentioned the upper floor housing grants, whether it's the downtown housing grant, the Catalyst grant, the community challenge grant. We're seeing housing as an element of nearly every downtown revitalization project that we're seeing on an annual basis. And to me, those are some of the indicators that communities and cities are thinking, how are we approaching these challenges more creatively than we have in the past? And I know, Liesl, you could speak to that as well through some of the innovation opportunities that have come through Empower Rural Iowa as it relates to how communities are thinking about themselves differently.
That sounds like a handoff to me.
Sure. Well, yes, I mean, I would just second that. I think that, and it's interesting, Michael, you mentioned earlier that this entrepreneurial spirit, and I feel like communities are kind of shifting what they look like now. They're no longer trying to necessarily always pull in, the biggest industry, biggest manufacturer, but instead they're really starting to support those smaller businesses and seeing that the variety, I mean, all of them are needed, but having some kind of diversity in the economic development sphere is really important. So they're figuring out, what the needs are of all of these different sectors and how they can support them. And we're seeing a variety of solutions, everything from, nonprofits that are really stepping up to cities getting more involved in untraditional ways, and businesses as well that are kind of sharing duties to make things work. And I think that's really kind of what's special about rural communities, is that ability to wear multiple hats, and that's just so normal and so part of the culture, is to help everybody out. So I really think that is going to be what helps sustain and keep our rural communities vibrant, is the fact that they're already used to wearing multiple hats and being, on the school board and on the church board and on their in their business council, that they're used to that. So then building that into the culture of the actual business itself or the city administration is almost a natural segue. So I think those are kind of the best practices we're seeing right now.
So speaking of segues, and Megan, I want to go to you. So you mentioned Frontier is also in Belle Plaine and also in Urbana. How did Frontier choose to go to Belle Plaine and Urbana? How did that come about? And was there conversation with those communities saying, okay, we're going to need training, we're going to need these various things? How did that happen? Why there, of all places?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to say that we went and had a bunch of conversations and we evaluated everything, but that's not exactly how either of those went down. I feel like it was more, we found a building and we found land, and that was kind of the opportunity that we had. We did look at labor numbers just to make sure, generally speaking, we could staff what we needed to, but more of it had to do with, we knew that they were good communities. We knew that we already had some employees that were from that area. And then it was a good opportunity from a building and a land standpoint for us to kind of move there, which the Belle Plaine facility has only been open for a few years, but I'll never forget the first time that we ran a job fair there right before we opened it up, and we had over 100 people line the doors and we had 30 openings. And it would be great to have that today, still having people lined up the door to work, but yes.
When would that have been when that opened?
Approximately like 4 years ago or so.
Okay.
3 or 4 years ago. Yes. So times have changed quite a bit since then.
All right. So Lisa Kremer, you're on the other side of this, right? You're the economic development. So I know that, and I'm going to mispronounce it, Prius Enterprises. Prius Enterprise is going to expand. They're going to more or less double their footprint there. Talk to us about exactly what's happening, first of all, to make sure I get that right. Okay. But then what convinced them to stay rather than go somewhere else? And how do you get businesses to come to Buchanan County? How does that work?
Prius Enterprises, over the last 3 years, they have when they're going to be done with this, will have invested $40 million, doubled their footprint and the production. It's going to be one of the largest extruders they have, and they aren't even done with their expansion. If they could find the workers, they would add another section to that. So the reason that we see like Prius expanding, we have very loyal businesses within our county, some really good businesses that have started there and expanded there. And part of the reason is at least our community and our counties, the larger businesses are in independence, and there's been a lot of support from the city. They will work exclusively with those businesses and industries. When they're ready to expand, they go through the tax abatement, the TIF, anything that business needs. They, along with economic development, will work with that business to make sure that it's a smooth process and that they're able to move right along without any hiccups. And that's been the case with priests. They've been lucky. They work well with the person. Larson Contracting is the person that owns that property, that area. So they can just reach out to them. They put together a plan and they started building, and within, I would say, probably 3 months. And the plan was to have the building done by the end of the year, and that's what's going to happen. So we do have a really good climate within our county, within our communities, as far as working with our industries, helping them to grow. And let's see, and so expansion, we have seen that expansion. We haven't lost any of our industries throughout COVID, which is good. And we've seen some had to scale back, but they're already coming back. They're already dealing with the lack of employees. So it's something that this has been really an eye-opening. One thing that we do is we want to make sure we're supporting our existing businesses. We do have some industries looking at coming into Buchanan County, and we do everything we can to encourage that and to find them what they need. But right now, our main focus is on our existing industries. And I think you see that a lot throughout the entire state in these small communities.
When you say supporting the businesses that are there already, what does that look like? What does that mean?
That looks like helping them find ways to bring more employees in. So the workforce housing, creating an atmosphere within the county that is open and inviting to employees to bring them into the area, working with them on creating the daycare opportunities that they need, everything that they need to help bring in those employees. We work to try to enhance that process and help move it along quicker.
So Michael and Liesl, and I'm not asking you to throw anybody under the bus here, but that kind of willingness will smooth the way for you. Do you hear that from businesses that they're finding out within other counties? Is that generally the way of economic development agencies, that they're going to do what they can in more rural areas?
I think it's always the hope. And I would say it's from county to county. I think there's there can be very different experiences, but whether be it from a county economic development perspective or a city economic development perspective, I think when there is that more collaborative spirit, when there is that spirit of supporting the existing assets, to me, that helps build that foundation of success, breeding success into the future. With that said, there are, of course, areas that there is more of a combative or more complacent economic development strategy or lack of strategy. And we all know that in many cases, not making a decision or not taking an action is taking an action. And that reflects on the economic reality in some places.
I agree with that.
Your head. Okay. All right. Couple questions from people watching. And who wants to answer this? Should there be significantly lower income tax, property tax, other costs in rural Iowa versus more populated areas to create incentives for rural population growth? Megan, you're nodding your head yes. You think there should be? You're in some rural areas. And Lisa, we're going to go to you after this.
No, I definitely, any incentives that you can do to promote businesses to be in some of these small towns is beneficial overall for it. So
that's a thumbs up.
yes.
Lisa Kremer, what do you see from your vantage point?
I would agree. I mean, it's a larger struggle for a smaller community to be able to do some of the things that we need to do, and in competition with the larger communities, it just makes it a little more difficult. We want the entire state obviously to grow, but it's a little more difficult for us.
Okay, so some help would be appreciated. This may be more, this is probably for everybody. Somebody was on one of our higher ed, listening to one of our higher ed panels earlier today. And the question is about the connections between workforce development and higher ed. And I think we're talking about training here, higher ed institutions, and where businesses fit in with filling workforce needs. In other words, businesses working with community colleges and universities and developing that training. And how do you see that working in rural Iowa? Is that working in rural Iowa? I don't mean that as a trick.
I think it is. I mean, I have a personal experience, and my son I have 6 children. I have 4 that went on to 4-year colleges. And then I have 1 that went into a trade. And the last dollar scholar, my youngest son's gonna come out of school with no debt. And he's gonna get a job probably paying more than some of my kids that graduated from the 4-year school. So that's personal, obviously, but I see it throughout our area. I see more interest in going for some of our kids that maybe would just go into a labor position, looking at those more skilled positions through the last dollar scholar. It's an opportunity that I think is becoming more apparent to our school age kids.
Would you give us an executive summary of last dollar scholar? Because you mentioned it twice.
The last dollar scholar is for, actually Liesl would probably be better at that. But the last dollar scholar is an opportunity to go into a skilled trade. There are a number of skilled trades out there where a student that qualifies for that trade goes to a 1 to 2 year school. And for example, my son is going into welding. It pays for all of his schooling, not obviously his living expenses, etc., but he won't have to pay any tuition. And that is happening throughout the state with that last dollar scholar for all of there are several hundred, I believe, Liesl, aren't there, opportunities of those occupations that are in high demand, several hundred.
I was going to say, I wish I had more facts off the top of my head from Future Ready Iowa, but yes, that's one of their programs, and they do have quite a few that I think are really strong, really popular, and they're looking for ways to continue to grow that.
So Lisa, while we're with you, let me ask you about this. So task force meetings have been held. Empower Rural Iowa has been having them for several years now, pretty much across the state and as well as online. What have you learned from those? Tell us a little bit about them, and particularly in terms of hiring and retention, and what sort of outcomes have you seen from those meetings and discussions?
Sure. Well, Empower Iowa is now in its 4th year, I believe. 2020 was like an invisible year, but and those task forces, Connect, Invest, and Grow that I mentioned earlier, are tasked with essentially learning a lot about a variety of issues and then developing policy or programmatic recommendations that are then presented to the governor each year. Some of them then go to, might require legislation during that next session. Others of them just get implemented. And the Invest Task Force for the past couple of years has Invest and the Grow actually have both looked at a combination of things related to recruitment and retention of just residents, of workforce, of how to support entrepreneurs, how to support businesses who want online, need to go online, especially after COVID. So we've kind of touched on a variety of those issues. One of the outcomes we have had is we have a new grant program, and this is like a shameless plug, but we have a current grant program open. We actually have 4, but the one I want to talk about is the Rural Return Incentive, and it's kind of turning the scholarship programs that we see so many rural communities doing on its head. So instead of paying people to leave, we are encouraging communities to develop programs to attract. So that can be a variety of ways. It can be the kind of reverse scholarship model where you actually pay off student debt to attract people. It could be helping with housing needs. It could be buying them a kayak if you're on a water trail and you want to celebrate the fact that you have this amazing local resource. So we do have a new grant program for communities that are interested in developing those type of incentive to return. So it's an incentive to incentivize. It's just one outcome because we have seen good examples across the state and across the nation. And that kind of gets to that whole point of you have to be able to have kind of the whole package deal to attract the workforce to your area. So that's just one example of an outcome of the Empower Iowa task force meetings. And they continue to meet, they continue to implement. We have a real focus on leadership too. We do see that rural communities that are succeeding are those that have strong leadership. It doesn't necessarily matter what your population size is. We have some communities that are 500 that are really super vibrant, have a lot going on, and it's because they have those really strong leaders at the helm. So we have some new leadership programming coming up that is helping to identify and foster new leaders within communities. So there's kind of a variety of things that bounce around. Workforce, we haven't really developed workforce programs because Future Ready Iowa is doing a lot of that. So, you know, imagine the state not wanting to duplicate itself. So we really try to just be a good partner with Future Ready Iowa and let them do the workforce actual training type programming. And we're filling some of the gaps that we see.
If I wanted to find out more about those programs, where would I go?
The Empower Iowa website, which is on the Iowa Economic Development website. Okay. I would recommend Googling Empower Iowa.
Okay, fair enough.
Instead of me reading to you what the whole website address is.
And Liesl, just so you know, I'm promoting all of those to my communities.
Yay, thank you.
So Michael, tell us a little bit about Main Street Iowa. It's been around for some time, I believe. What has it done? How does it work with communities? And you get probably a lot of applications, I'll bet. And how do you, who goes through those and how do you decide?
Yeah, absolutely. Main Street Iowa has been here in the state of Iowa since 1986 and was really an outcome of the farm crisis of the 80s of how the Iowa Economic Development Authority could help communities empower really a change in direction and support for the community revitalization process. And Main Street is a model that's been created by a national nonprofit, Main Street America. And we implement that here, really that focuses a revitalization, a deliberate revitalization program around 4 forces of value that drive commercial and real estate development. In a nutshell, our team partners with communities across the state that are committed to using downtown revitalization as that catalyst locally. For long-term relationship of help guiding everything from strategic visioning sessions to, most importantly, what we provide is really a behind-the-scenes team of technical assistance providers that provides free and ongoing assistance to designated Main Street programs. We currently have 54 designated programs across the state that participate specifically with the Main Street program. But as Lisa is very well familiar with in Buchanan County, our program extends to the Iowa Downtown Resource Center, which is our umbrella function, if you will, and we provide limited and fee-based services to downtowns across the state. And those tools have really been tools for communities who are thinking, you know what, we don't really have a plan. We don't really have a strategy for how we want to focus our next steps. But tools like the downtown assessment, the downtown walk around, the Catalyst grant have been really great functions to really provide stair-step support systems for communities that want to do something a little bit more than what they're doing now, but maybe not make the full commitment into what it means to be a Main Street program long-term.
What are some of those downtown Iowa, I believe you said it was called, some of those downtown Iowa tools?
The Downtown Resource Center tools. Yeah,
That's what yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. The Downtown Resource Center has kind of three main tools. Is the Downtown Assessment, which is a 3-day planning program that a local community could participate in with us. That really focuses on an 18-month, 2-year plan for a downtown revitalization process. And that really starts to build a collaborative mindset with communities that may be thinking it's just the city function or it's just this nonprofit function, of really bringing everyone together in the same room to drive that, knowing that partners like Megan and major corporations and communities help support and drive that effort as well. The Downtown Walk Around is a 1-day service that Liesl oftentimes participates with, and that is a 1-day professional first impressions. And those are oftentimes used for communities that are very small, that are thinking, you know what, we haven't touched or done anything in our downtown in our community for years, and we want just 2 or 3 low-hanging fruit pieces that we could do to start our process or start our conversation. And then the last function of the Downtown Resource Center from a statewide perspective is funding. We do administer the Community Catalyst Grant, which is a $100,000 matching grant for downtown revitalization projects in communities throughout the state of Iowa. And then Lisa mentioned our new program, the Downtown Housing Grant. And that is a new program we introduced in September. It's a downtown housing incentive that provides an incentive from $300,000 to $600,000 to really help create new housing in downtowns across the state through the adaptive use of existing buildings. So we try to be as holistic as we can, knowing that there's some communities that really want to dive deep, and there's other communities that just want to scratch the surface or use more of an a la carte service.
So you mentioned we've now been talking about affordable housing that's starting to bubble up. So for each of you, what's the state of things on affordable housing? How often does it come up? Megan, let's start with you. How often for Frontier employees or candidates for jobs does affordable housing come up? Like, where am I going to live and it's too far for to drive, which I guess is also a transportation issue. But how much of an issue, how much is Frontier thinking about that?
Yeah, no. A lot with it all. So being in small communities, it's really important that we have housing available. Otherwise, people have no reason to come out here, no place to stay out here. So that piece is really important. Also, from an employee standpoint, one of the reasons that we did bring on-site support is housing is very expensive for employees. And when they have housing expenses and then a medical expense or some other life thing happens to them, it's very hard for them to be able to pay for those high cost homes for it all. So when we brought on-site support, part of that support is helping them through housing situations, offering them a little bit of funding support or financial support to kind of get them through those situations.
So Liesl, from in Des Moines. So when you're talking to businesses, I assume affordable housing comes up a lot. And what do those conversations look like? What are you hearing?
I mean, we're hearing that there's a big need, but also there's not always a great understanding of the current housing situation. And there's sometimes a misconception of the need is only like, single family detached homes. I feel like I'm now just like a soapbox selling all my programs, but the Rural Housing Assessment Grant Program is one we came up with. And what I really wanted to call it was Rural Housing Assessment Interpretation and Implementation Grant Program, but they thought that was too long. But essentially, we have partnered with ISU Extension and Outreach on this effort. And it really is, instead of them helping to develop a housing assessment, they work with rural communities on interpreting and implementing that data. So they look at the current housing situation. They look at the codes, they look at the incentives, they look at kind of the environment that community has made around housing. And then they develop implementation recommendations, and the grant then has dollars available to start implementing those steps. Because so often we see communities go through, urban or rural, go through a housing assessment and then it sits on the shelf, and 5 years later, like, hey, we should do that again. So we really wanted to have that implementation factor in there too. And what we're seeing is a combination of needs are out there. I mean, we all might know that infill is probably pretty important, and rehab is needed, but upper story housing is one that I think especially Downtown Resource Center, has been harping on for a while, but it's really catching on now that people are like, oh, that's a great idea. That can make money and make people happy. We're also seeing that a lot of homes are perfectly like good stock homes in rural communities that are being filled currently with maybe 1 or 2 people when it used to be a home, but there's no option to downsize for people who want to age in place, stay in their community. There's no second option. So we're seeing communities look at kind of maybe like the condo style, not tiny homes, but like along those lines where it's like a smaller cottage type style homes. We're seeing that that's kind of interest in some communities and a good option for maybe millennials who still don't want to have to mow their lawn or scoop snow, as well as empty nesters that are looking to downsize. And then that opens up more housing for those young families or growing families to move in. So we're kind of seeing that if they have the planning in place and the knowledge of what they're needing, that's a really solid first step. So that's something that we are encouraging rural communities to consider right now.
For the record, I don't want to mow my grass either.
I don't either.
Actually, I hire some guys, a retired high school basketball coach, and he shows up every couple of weeks, and it's wonderful. So I want to remind people we've got about 5 minutes left. If you have any questions for the panel, now's the time. Lisa, I come to Buchanan County. I'm a business. I'm thinking about locating there. And I say, here's what I'm going to be paying. I'm going to need affordable housing. What do they mean by affordable housing? And what are you going to tell me about that? What Buchanan County for that answer?
Oh, that's a tough one because we're kind of doing what Liesl, everything that Liesl talked about is what we're working on. We're working on freeing up to help employees find housing and possibly supplementing that housing, and an industry coming in is going to have to think outside of the box, I think.
What does that mean? What does that look like?
That means they need to look at, okay, we have this upper story housing. We're going to see some upper story housing coming into our larger community and independence. We have the existing homes that maybe need to be refurbished. And we need to be looking at apartment size home or apartments for our area. It's just, we've got things going. We've got the duplexes going out for people to free up those larger houses, but it's just slow moving. I think you see that in a lot of communities, except for, if it's really a bedroom community. For any industry coming in, I know they want to see their people working within their community and living within their community. And I think eventually we'll get there, but we're just going to have to continue to do the processes that we're doing to make it possible to add more housing within our area.
Okay, so do more of what we're doing.
Do more of
Keep
what we're
doing
doing. Try to do it faster, I guess.
All right, so we've got about 3 minutes left. This question for everybody. It's our speed dating component for 2022. What's the one thing about all the number of issues we've been talking about, maybe some issues we haven't talked about yet for 2022? Workforce in rural areas from your various perspectives. What's the one thing you're optimistic about that you think we're going to get resolved, or it'll be better, or we'll move along? If anything,
I'll go first.
Mike? Yes, please.
Just so no one else feels it. Well, I'm super excited about all of the state funding that has been allocated to broadband. I feel like that is going to really assist in some new ways for our businesses to maybe shift a little bit, to be able to think, have more capabilities, more bandwidth, literally, which will just change the workforce needs, the workforce kind of opportunities. It'll also kind of increase opportunities for, people don't want to move where there's not connectivity. So it's just another thing that cities and counties are going to be able to talk about that may not currently be connected, but with this funding supporting reaching those areas, that is one thing they'll be like, yeah, check that box. We are connected. So I think that's going to make a big difference.
Okay. Megan, one thing makes you optimistic.
Yeah, no, that's good. I would say the one thing is that I think there's a lot more partnerships going on overall between businesses, between nonprofits and businesses. Also, Iowa workforce development and economic development, I think, are reaching out into the communities more than they ever have before to really ask, what do you need? And how can we support you guys into this next year? So that's really good to see kind of all around.
Michael.
Megan stole mine. Mine's the collaboration. I think there was a lot of creativity that happened in 2020 and into 2021. And I think partnering that collaboration, that collaborative spirit with some of the funding sources that are being rolled out, state, federal, local, I think there's a lot of good that's going to happen in 2021 or 2022 based on that collaboration.
Yes, we are already in the final quarter, amazingly. We thought 2020 was going to get better, and then we got through that, and we thought 2021, this will be great, and here we are. So, Lisa, what do you see in Buchanan County? What are you optimistic about going forward?
I see collaboration. You guys stole it too. Collaboration is one thing that we've seen within our county and within our region. I'm really optimistic about what is happening in Independence with our downtown, with the, it's really exciting to see how that is going to change and how that is really going to improve not only the look, but the feel of the community. With the revitalization, we have at least eight, hopefully 16 fronts of buildings that are going to be refurbished. We're going to have hopefully upper story housing. We've got community catalyst grants. We've got 2 of them where we've got new businesses coming in. So I'm really excited about what we're going to see happening in Buchanan County.
Okay, thank you. And that brings us to the end of our time. I want to thank our panelists for taking time out of your day to be with us here. Everyone who joined us today, thank you for that. Thank you for your time. Remember, we have more panels, many more panels tomorrow for the rest of the Gazette's Iowa Ideas Conference. These sessions are being recorded. So come the end of the day, Friday, if there's one you missed that you really wanted to see, Governor Reynolds was in the Gazette office today. I believe I wasn't there, but that's what I heard. Kelly Garcia was there. We've got all kinds of panels about these topics and more. You can find those right here. Check back on our website and you can watch those. And thank you. Have a very good day, rest of your week, and see you tomorrow. Thank you. Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.